Testing 1 2 1 2. Testing 1 2 1 2. Testing 1 2 1 2. Ladies and gentlemen, testing 1 2 1 2. Testing 1 2 1 2. Just getting ready and set up here, folks. Testing 1 2 1 2. Chuck, is it looking good over there? Alright, there you go. Alright. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. This is Geezy Truth News. The one and only. All right. Let's get the show on the road, eh? How's everybody doing tonight? All right, welcome everybody to Geezy Truth News. That's right, everyone. We got a whole lot. Things are getting serious here, and we're not sure a whole lot of who to trust here. Which is why we come over here. Tune in, callers call in. We may have some technical difficulties, but I can assure you, the phone lines should be open. Things should be good. VIP, and a whole lot more. So take a look. It's March 20th, 2020! So, without further ado, let's just get it on. No, thank you very much. So, you know, it's been a couple weeks or so. Thank you very much. Thank you, I appreciate it. We're gonna have some serious business here. We gotta talk about the stock market. Gotta talk about, you know, just about a whole lot of everything. The Wuhan virus. So, you know, let's see. March 20th, April 10th. I think April 10th it might be the next big day in terms of Truth. And if anybody's got any further additions, go ahead and add on. But we're going to have to go on and get this going. So what else? Lots of theories. The market's pretty much gone from 30,000 to 20,000. It's pretty serious. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So, I mean, what are the headlines and what's up with everybody here? Because I'm telling you, we got Tony and Chuck over there twiddling on the dials. Phone line should be open. Go ahead, comments, and then we're gonna go ahead and get the VIP coming up here and see what's up, what the updates are. 5 stages of pandemic. So they're obviously, this virus thing is getting serious. It looks like, the whole world is taking it seriously. The Fed, again, remember what this show is all about, and the Fed, and pedogate. And so I don't know if this is a huge distraction or what. A lot of people have theories of talking about all this. But, people are apparently dying in hospitals with the Wuhan virus and all this stuff. So, the COVID-19 effect on global flight capacity. So here's the Federal Reserve. It says that everything bubble has burst. The fuse is now lit on the 250 trillion debt bomb. Now today is March 20th. It was supposed to be a big whoop on the market. However, from what I remember, Dow skids 900 points. Lower Friday afternoon as stocks add to losses at end of worst week since 2008. So it's a 920 drop. Dow Jones is right now is 19,167. It's fluctuating right now still because we're still not at the end of the day. And then with crypto, it's went up a little bit back to 6,200, but it dropped a little. Went from 8 to almost 4 or something like that, and now it's going back up to 6,200. Apparently, that's what's happening. So, and then gold is, from what from the sources say, that they've been staying roughly around the same, about 1,500. So, 1,500. Well, it's at 1490, but So there you have it. Black Monday coming up or what? It's hard to tell. The inside traders obviously know what they're doing, but the Federal Reserve, again, with the quantitative easing, they're pumping trillions of dollars into the market, and so here we go. So let's get the show on the road and let's get it started here. Let's see. Hello, Jim.
How's everything?
Great. How are you doing?
Good.
Let me try to remember how to flip it. So there you go. Well, how are you? How are you doing? Everything's good?
Everything's good.
All right. So there you go. So where should we start?
If you can give me a minute more, I can give you a lot about the coronavirus right off the bat.
That sounds great. Let's start with the coronavirus. What are your thoughts and what are the updates?
I just have to add a couple more slides here to give you the works.
All right.
We're not live, right? We're recording?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, good. Okay, perfect.
All right. So yeah, it's pretty interesting what's going on. Today was supposed to be like a big crash, but they keep predicting it, and then it keeps. It's going. It has went from 30,000 to 20, so that's something.
You're talking about the stock market?
Yes. And just the economy as a whole, everything, the whole package.
Well, the idea of shutting down the United States economy is just staggering.
Yeah, well, they're pretty much doing that, aren't they?
It looks like it. And I tell you, I think we'll talk about it on the air. I just swallowed wrong shortly before we're doing this, so I made me a little coffee, but it's just coincidental.
All right.
We're doing an hour, are we?
Yeah, why not? The more
an
the
hour
better.
Or less.
Yeah, that as much as information. There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, but how long did you want the show to go?
Oh, we can go for an hour.
Yeah,
if you got.
Okay, that's fine. That works for me.
Sweet.
Okay, I'm ready when you are.
All right. 3, 2, 1, go. Hello, and thank you, Jim, for coming on the show. What are the updates and what's going on? As always, thank you for coming on.
Oh, it's a great plan. That the fatality rate reported by the media is completely inaccurate. The actual rate is less than the flu. It's really extraordinary what's gone on here, where estimates have been made that are wildly mistaken. The actual results for the coronavirus are lower than for the flu. The actual fatality rate for those confirmed to have coronavirus is about 3.4%, while the rate for those confirmed to have had the flu are about 10%. So roughly you could say the coronavirus is only about 1/3 as potent or viral as the flu. Current estimates are not comparing apples to apples. It turns out the Ethiopian director of the World Health Organization compared the flu rate based upon estimates for those who had the flu, which was a very large number, and actual deaths, when what you need to compare is those who are confirmed to have the flu and actual deaths. So he was comparing estimates of a wildly larger population than appropriate versus actual deaths of the flu, but confirmed coronavirus versus actual deaths from confirmed coronavirus. So he got a much too small figure for the flu fatality rate. And it's just stunning. It's like comparing apples to oranges. By doing the coronavirus fatality rate this way, it's way overstated compared to the flu. And we have, therefore, this, stunning crisis raging worldwide. Now, we're hearing a lot about Italy, and we're getting conflicting reports. Some sources have told me the actual number of deaths in Italy is very, very small. But what appears to be the case regardless, 99% of those who died from the virus had other conditions. These can include diabetes, it can include being overweight, it can include, here's something, The new study is providing insight as to why Italy's death rate, about 8% of infected persons, is higher than in other countries. The Rome-based institute it has examined medical records of about 18% of the country's coronavirus fatality, finding only 3 victims who had no previous pathology. Most of the others suffered from at least 3 prior illnesses. About a fourth had either 1 or 2 previous conditions. More than 75% had high blood pressure. 35% had diabetes. A third suffered from heart disease. The average age of those who died in Italy is 79.5. That's interesting, my friend, because my age today is 79. As of March 17th, and that's St. Patrick's Day, 70 persons under 50 had died from the disease, while all of Italy's victims under 40 have been males with serious existing medical conditions. So we have about 100,000 Italians who've contracted the disease, which would bring the country's death rate closer to the global average of about 2% when you sort out the statistics, even in Italy. So that's number one. You're getting very exaggerated death rates. The threat is vastly lower. It's actually less serious than the flu. About 10% of flu victims expire, but, from coronavirus, a high, say, of 3.4 or closer to the average of 2. Now, it turns out that, as we would expect, there is a lot of medical research going on at a breakneck pace. And I found an extremely good article about it, which you can find on the internet. COVID-19, that's the name that has been given to the coronavirus. COVID-19 treatment might already exist. What we have going on is that the systems biologists who study cells, how cells are affected by viruses during infections, are interested in finding points of vulnerability for dealing with the drug, which turns out to be a stealthy opponent. It actually, these are very small cells that cannot reproduce on their own, but it contains about 30 proteins, whereas a human cell has more than 200,000. I mean, when you get into the microbiology, it's simply stunning. Who would think a human cell would have more than 20,000 proteins? But the coronavirus only has about 30. To get around this limited set of tools, the virus turns the human body against itself. The pathways into the human cell are normally locked to outside invaders, but the coronavirus uses its own proteins like keys to open the locks and enter a person's cells. Once inside, the virus binds to proteins the cell normally uses for its own functions, hijacking the cell and turning it into a coronavirus factory. This is the methodology, the biology of its reproduction. As the resources and mechanics of infected cells are retooled to produce thousands and thousands of viruses, the cells themselves, the human cells, begin to die. In other words, they've been exploited by the virus to its own benefit. Now, it turns out that lung cells are particularly vulnerable because they have high amounts of the lock protein. It's a SARS-CoV-2 used for entry by the coronavirus, which when the lung cells die, it causes respiratory problems that can bring about death. Now, there turn out to be 2 ways you can fight back. You could have drugs that attack the protein, the virus's own proteins, preventing them from doing jobs like entering the cell or copying their genetic material once they are inside. There is a drug called Remdesivir, Remdesivir, in clinical trials, and that's how it works. The problem being that the viruses can mutate, evolve, and change over time, so that they may render this type of drug useless. It's an arms race, you might call it, which is why you need a new flu shot every year, because the flu has mutated or evolved. Alternatively, a drug can work by blocking a viral protein from entering a human protein, the one it needs to survive. This approach, namely protecting the host machinery, has a big advantage over disabling the virus itself, because the human cell doesn't change as fast. Once you find a good drug, therefore, it should keep working, which is the approach that's being taken at San Francisco. Very, very good team out there at the University of California, San Francisco. And in fact, the report I'm addressing is authored by Nevin Krogan, who's Professor and Director of Quantitative Biosciences Institute at that campus. So this is all looking very promising, particularly since it also appears to be the case that there is a drug already available used for malaria that may prove to be efficacious here, where I'm a bit troubled, just a bit troubled, by roadblocks to its use being put up by members of the Federal Drug Administration about, testing and so forth, suggesting it could take 12 months to 18 months to get this in the field. Well, that's completely ridiculous. What they need to do is test it on some samples and then move to larger utilization. It's very, very embarrassing, by the way, that it's really a simple failure to appreciate quantitative methods by this Ethiopian Director General of the World Health Organization that has precipitated this. But the idea that it's highly virulent, that coronavirus is far more virulent than the flu, has also been promoted by even Wikipedia, which, for those who may be unaware, is actually a Zionist operation I discovered when I, as founder of Scholars for 9/11 Truth, went to Wikipedia in order to revise false, inaccurate reports about the history of the organization I had established. 5 times I made the corrections, 5 times I was rejected, and subsequently I found I had an encounter with the editor, and I said, "You're not going to let me correct it, are you?" And he said, "No." He was very candid. He wasn't going to let me correct it. In other words, they had a preference for false information over true about Scholars for 9/11 Truth. Now, what Wikipedia has done in this instance is slash the Spanish flu death rate. Now, the Spanish flu in 1918 killed between 10 and 20 millions. I mean, it was really vast. Let me get to the study. We've had a couple of people taking issue with us. This is coming from Zero Hedge regarding the case fatality rate of the 1918 Spanish flu. Citing Wikipedia and the CDC, we gave the rate as being between 10 and 20% of those who were affected, which obviously is about twice as potent as the normal or common flu, which only has a 10% death rate. A couple of commentators, however, insisted that the actual case fatality rate was 2 to 3%. And what they found was Wikipedia was had revised the report about it to suggest that rate was only 2 to 3 for the vast death and devastation wreaked by the Spanish flu in 1918, to make it look as coronavirus was equal to or even more serious than the Spanish flu, which I've already explained is not the case. It's not even as serious as the ordinary common flu. What we found was quite interesting. Here's the pre-February 22nd, 2020 opening paragraph of the mortality section on the wiki page for the Spanish flu. The global mortality rate for the 1918-19 pandemic is not known, but an estimated 10 to 20% of those who were infected died. About a third of the world population was affected, and 3% to 6% of the entire global population of over 1,800,000,000 died. Now now they've revised it. They changed the paragraph to read as follows. It's estimated that 1/3 of the global population was infected, and the World Health Organization estimates that 2 to 3% of those who were infected died. Remember, previously they acknowledged it was 10 to 20. This is a huge disparity. The World Health Organization report they use as a source is actually not about the Spanish flu, but simply mentions it in passing. It does indeed say 2 to 3% of those infected died, but gives no source, and also claims this represented 20 to 50 million people. The trouble with this is that the higher range of this estimate, 50 million as 2% of total cases, gives a figure of 2.5 billion total cases infected with the Spanish flu, which is greater than the entire population of the world at the time, which is 1.8 billion. So you have this Zionist-controlled WikiLeaks hyping the seriousness of the coronavirus, which, of course, the way the United States is responding by basically shutting down is catastrophic in the extreme and can do a kind of damage to the United States economically from which we may or may not be able to recover. Meaning, this is the greatest crisis I would suggest the United States has encountered in modern times. You'd have to go back, I think, to the Great Crash and the Depression of 1929 to find something comparable. On the other hand, even though WikiLeaks is a Zionist op, is leading us in the wrong direction, we have an Israeli virologist telling the world leaders to calm unnecessary panic over exaggerated threats from coronavirus, that most of those infected won't even know it. This top Israeli virologist, Professor Jihad Bishara, the director of the infectious disease unit at Petah Tikva's Beilinson Hospital, said this week most people will recover from the coronavirus without even knowing they were sick. The Times of Israel reported what he had to say, that some of the steps being taken in Israel and abroad were very important, but the virus is not airborne. Most people who are infected will recover without even knowing they're sick. The at-risk groups are now known, and the global panic is unnecessary and exaggerated. I've been in this business for 30 years, Bashara said. I've been through MERS, SARS, Ebola, the first Gulf War, and the second, and I don't recall anything like this. There's unnecessary, exaggerated panic. We have to calm people down. People are thinking that there's a kind of virus that's in the air, it's going to attack every one of us. Whoever's attacked is going to die. That's not the way it is at all. It's not in the air. Not everyone infected dies. Most will get better, won't even know they were sick, or will have a bit of mucus. And remember, as I explained, the rates we're seeing are like 2% on the average around the world, up to 3.4% or so, relatively modest and less than from the ordinary flu. Yet, he observes, in Israel and around the world, everybody is whipping everybody else up into a panic. The leaders, be the media and the wider public, who then in turn start to stress out the leaders. We've entered some kind of vicious cycle. Now, it's very interesting, given my suspicions about what's going on here, that we have a political pandemic rather than a medical emergency. And you can confirm the massive evidence that substantiates what I'm saying here on my blog at jamesfetzer.org, where there are at least a half a dozen very detailed, very substantial reports that bolster what I'm saying here, where this may even have a 5G component. We know, for example, that Wuhan is a major center for rolling out 5G. We know that 10,000 5G antennae were recently put up in Wuhan. There's another 135 in the surrounding province. We know that 5G weakens the immune system. And when your immune system is weakened, you will be susceptible to problems that your immune system in its normal state would effortlessly ward off. It also appears that in regions, even in China, where 5G is not prevalent, that they have a very modest rate, nothing to write home about, which tends to substantiate. We also have leading figures here in the United States, including Professor Emeritus at Washington State University, who's an expert on health science issues, saying that this massive rollout of 5G without conducting safety studies is the dumbest idea in the history of the world, with which I completely agree. Now, meanwhile, Trump has been doing everything he can, and I'm now, therefore, addressing the political aspects of the coronavirus as opposed to the scientific. And the American people are responding. I think this is very much like as if the United States were going to war. George W. Bush, for example, got astronomical approval ratings after 9/11 because the American people had no idea that 9/11 was an orchestrated attack that was brought to us compliments of the CIA, the neocons in the Department of Defense. Most of them were dual U.S.-Israeli citizens, and the Mossad. They don't appreciate that 9/11 was arranged in order to manipulate public opinion in the United States to support American military intervention in the Middle East, where the master plan was revealed at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco by Wesley Clark on October 7, 2007, where he explained that when he returned to the Pentagon from serving as Supreme Commander Allied Forces Europe, meaning commanding general of NATO, to the Pentagon, he encountered a general he had known well, who told him that the plan now is to invade Iraq. They both thought that was stunning because, of course, the belief at the time was that this had been Islamic militants who were based in Afghanistan under the control of a guy in a cave there by the name of Osama bin Laden. Even that was a monstrous hoax all by itself because, unknown to most Americans to this very day, Osama was our man in Afghanistan. He was instrumental in getting Stinger missiles into the hands of the Mujahideen they used to shoot down Soviet helicopters and planes to drive them out. He was actually an officer in the CIA. His name was Colonel Tim Osman, and an official from the agency visited him in a hospital in Dubai shortly before his death from his medical maladies, which include kidney disease, because it's tough to get dialysis machines in and out of those caves in Afghanistan. He actually died on 15 December 2001. He was buried in an unmarked grave in accordance with Islamic tradition. There were local obituaries, both CNN and Fox News, on 26 December 2001, published the reports of his death. The CIA, for political reasons, nevertheless continued to use fake Osamas, create phony audio tapes and videotapes. And if you want to see an excellent discussion of what was going on there, you can go to my blog and look for the piece by Nick Kollerstrom entitled Osama bin Laden 1957 to 2001, where you can see the image of many of the fake Osamas. I had founded Scholars for 9/11 Truth in December of 2005, and we were publishing reports about the fake Osamas that were being presented, where I had the benefit of the leading expert on Osama in the United States from Duke University, who was confirming that these were not, reports, audios, and so forth of the real Osama bin Laden. Nevertheless, Barack Obama found it politically beneficial to resurrect Osama and to have him die for a second time during a raid on a compound in Pakistan, where local residents reported they had seen neither hide nor hair of Osama bin Laden, that the photograph widely touted as supposed to be him with a remote control TV device in his hand was not Osama, but the owner of the compound, and where Obama used this to deflect criticism that Guantanamo was still open, though it really wasn't his fault that was the case. The Republicans wouldn't let him close it, but turned it to a political benefit by claiming that the tip on Osama's location had come from one of those who was detained at Guantanamo. He'd also been criticized for having American troops still stationed in Pakistan. So the claim was how fortuitous it was we had the troops there to conduct the raid. And any questions about his birth certificate, which is provably fake, I have done research on this, and I can assure you Osama bin Laden was born in Kenya, where they have a monument to the first Kenyan president of the United States, not knowing that there cannot be a Kenyan president of the United States, where we even have his student body identification card from Columbia University identifying him as a foreign student. Why, as his first act as president of the United States, he sealed his educational records just when every little kid across the country wanted to study the life history of the first black president of the United States. So he positioned himself for a triumphal re-election by this complete and total charade. Which is embarrassing in the extreme, and where I published too about it when a film came out entitled Zero Dark 30 that was glorifying the heroic action of the SEALs, most of whom would subsequently die in the crash or shooting down of an old Chinook helicopter from the Vietnam era. They ought not to have been embarked upon anyway, which some suspect was to seal their lips forever about the charade in which they had participated at that compound in Pakistan. In any case, Obama positioned himself for a triumphal re-election as president of the United States. Meanwhile, 9/11, to put all this back into perspective, really appears to have originated in the fertile mind of Bibi Netanyahu back in the 1980s, where he even organized a conference in Jerusalem on terrorism, published a book in 1987, Terrorism, How the West Can Win, when the thought of terrorism was completely remote from the minds of virtually all Western citizens, but where with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1990, the United States remaining the only superpower in the world, there was a think tank was organized called Project for a New American Century that was filled with these dual U.S.-Israeli citizens that were campaigning for the United States to create a new American empire that would endure for the next 100 years if only the U.S. would enter into the Middle East and take out the modern Arab states that served as a counterbalance to Israel's domination of the entire region. Indeed, that's exactly what Wesley Clark explained at the Commonwealth Club in 2007. When he had returned to the Pentagon a second time, he found encountered the same general, asked if we were still planning to invade Iraq, and the general said, "Oh, no, sir, it's much worse than that. Step into my office. We just have a memorandum from Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld that now we're going to attack, take out the governments of 7 countries in the next 5 years, including Iraq and Libya, ending with Syria and Iran," which both Wesley Clark and the general found totally puzzling. I mean, Clark asked, "Well, why are we doing it?" And the general said, "I don't know. I guess it's just that we're good at it." And Clark asked, "Well, is that memorandum classified?" He said, "Oh, yes, sir." So Clark said, "Well, then don't share it with me. I may want to talk about it." When he eventually did in 2007 at the Commonwealth Club. Well, what this means is all these years and all these lives and all this national treasury we've been expending in the Middle East had absolutely nothing to do with democracy. It had nothing to do with freedom. It had nothing to do with tyrants. just to illustrate how massively the American people have been misled. NATO was used to invade and slaughter Libya, really at the direction of Hillary Clinton, then our Secretary of State, and it was just dreadful. Gaddafi was actually using the oil resources of Libya to benefit the Libyan people. He had created a national health care program, national public education, national warehouses stocked with food so anyone was hungry could get all they could possibly need. If you had a medical problem that couldn't be dealt with in Libya, he would fly you and a friend or relative anywhere in the world to have it treated at government expense. He was giving $25,000 gifts to newly married couples to help them to start their families. So it was like the most humane society ever realized on the face of Earth. But he was also developing the Great Waterworks project that would have turned North Africa into a veritable oasis, and introducing the gold dinar, which would have rapidly become the currency of all of Africa. Well, the Western banking interests mean that the Rothschilds, who are massive Zionists who control the banks in most countries of the world, where the original Lord Rothschild said, "Let me control a nation's finances, and I care not who controls their government," because he could control what goes on in the country from that advantageous position. We find in the emails that were released by WikiLeaks after the alleged Russian hacking, that in fact, in addition to the motive of the banks of not wanting Gaddafi to introduce the gold dinar, we find the revelation that France was upset by the Great Waterworks project because it wanted to keep Africa as a kind of neo-colonial preserve for France to exploit the natural resources of Africa, which Gaddafi was undermining because he was strengthening the ability of Africans to utilize their own resources for the benefit of Africans, as though that were a bad idea. So we had a massive slaughter of Libya. Gaddafi didn't even put up a fight, even though he had an extensive stockpile of weapons. He even traveled in a convoy under a white flag of surrender to a location designated by the Department of State. But Hillary Clinton had the convoy interdicted and had Gaddafi brutally murdered, castrated, and sodomized with a bayonet. She would later laugh about it, paraphrase Julius Caesar on the Gallic Wars, where Caesar said, "I came, I saw, I conquered." Hillary said, "We came, we saw, he died, cackle, cackle, cackle." One of many reasons why this woman, who is brutal and sadistic and corrupt, most perhaps corrupt politician in the history of the United States, is absolutely unfit to serve as president, but where I anticipate, because of Joe Biden's cognitive decline, it's obvious from watching him with all of these misstatements and gaffes endlessly taking place that the man is actually brain damaged. I was fairly astonished when during the latest debate with Bernie, he didn't have a major mental breakdown, but I guarantee you it's coming. This is a reason why supporters of Biden, like Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, doesn't want there to be any more debates. He doesn't want the public to have access to the state of Joe Biden, which is an advanced state of mental deterioration. Joe Biden could not possibly carry out the duties of the President of the United States. So what I anticipate is going to occur during the convention here in Milwaukee, just a few months hence, where I reside near Madison. So Milwaukee is just a hop, skip, and a jump away. That I would anticipate they're going to have a brokered convention, or if Biden has enough delegates for the first round to win the nomination outright, he will select Hillary Clinton to be his running mate. People think when Biden said he was going to pick a woman that was beneficial to Amy Klobuchar or, Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren or Stacey Abrams. No, none of the above. Hillary Clinton wouldn't allow any of them to steal her action. And if indeed it were a Biden-Hillary Clinton ticket, then no doubt after the election, Biden would step aside because of his cognitive impairments and allow Hillary to ascend to the presidency. This is a very close approximation to the master plan taking place now under the guidance of the Democratic National Committee. And let me point out as well, Joe Biden hasn't actually won all these elections. Oh yes, he got the votes, but you have to understand history. For 32 years, through 3 presidential campaigns, Joe Biden did not win a single primary or caucus in 32 years. In Iowa this year, he came in 4th. In New Hampshire, he came in 5th. Yes, he did come in 2nd in Nevada, but his trouncing of Bernie Sanders in South Carolina was, I have no doubt whatsoever, and you can consult any statistician you like who's familiar with American polling and procedures, Biden went from a 5% lead over Bernie the week before to a 30-point victory. Now, that is completely contrary to the American political experience. If that had been legit, you'd have to rewrite all the political science textbooks and all the studies and all the prognostication based on past performance, because it was completely atypical. What happened is that Google intervened by sending out vote reminders, in this case in South Carolina, to black Democrats, telling them to get out and vote for Barack Obama's vice president, which they dutifully did in vast numbers. Dr. Robert Epstein testified to Congress in July, where Epstein's a very respected behavioral science scholar. He's the editor-in-chief of Psychology Today, that he has been studying Google algorithms and their effect upon voting patterns, and that in 2016, Google had been responsible for giving Hillary between 2.6 and 10.4 million additional votes. Between 2.6 and 10.4. During his conversation with Ted Cruz, Cruz was saying, well, Google may be spending millions or even billions of dollars to affect the outcome, and Dr. Epstein had to correct him. No, Senator, just to be precise, it didn't cost them a dime. All they had to do was to send out a reminder. It didn't even leave a record. It would be virtually invisible and have these profound effects. Well, once having intervened in South Carolina, they couldn't stop, or it would have been too odd and obvious what had taken place. So they these massive votes, when he's not only an uninteresting guy with no ideas, no program, no agenda, but he inspires zero enthusiasm. I mean, look, Hillary was in a deplorable state during her campaign because she would be in St. Petersburg, Florida, drawing 300 people, while Donald Trump was in Boca Raton drawing 30,000. So they even took to photoshopping Hillary to make it look as though they were as significant as those of Donald Trump. Joe Biden is so incompetent. If he actually becomes a nominee, Donald Trump will run circles around him and vitiate him on multiple grounds, including the report he gave at the Council on Foreign Relations, boasting about how he'd gone to Ukraine, how he as vice president threatened to withhold $1 billion of U.S. foreign assistance to Ukraine unless the Ukrainian government fired the prosecutor that was looking into the corrupt oil company Burisma, where Biden's son Hunter had a cushy position at $50,000 a month or more for non-performance. I mean, he's totally unqualified for the position. It was graft and corruption and influence peddling. And where Biden gave him 6 hours to fire the prosecutor before he flew home or they wouldn't get the money. And then he turns to the crowd and says, son of a bitch, they did it. They fired him. Well, that's a real quid pro quo of the kind that the Democrats falsely alleged Trump had committed. The fact is, Trump was not guilty of that offense, but Joe Biden was. We can run that commercial, that presentation he gave at the Council on Foreign Relations over and over. But here's one that's going to be even more devastating to his campaign prospects. Joe Biden has abnormal affinity for little girls. It's profoundly disturbing when you watch him in operation. Dr. Eowyn, who maintains the magnificent Fellowship of the Mind's blog, recently did a study about how when he swore in as senator in his role as vice president, the senator had a little boy and a little girl there, and how he completely ignored the little boy, but he kept pulling the little girl toward the front of his trousers. She didn't like it and sought to draw away. But Biden, under the cover of being hospitable and friendly with the parents, drew her back toward his crotch. Even more revealing, when Christopher Coons of Delaware was sworn in as senator, he had his young daughter present. And after the swearing-in ceremony, Joe Biden leaned over to her. It was caught on the mics and the video. I saw it when it happened. And he said to her, "Do you have any idea how horny it makes me to be standing next to a 14-year-old girl?" It created quite a sensation and discussion in outlets like The Hill, which of course is a publication for those who work on Capitol Hill. You can find it online still, but it's been edited so you can't hear the audio track. But I guarantee you can read the audio track because it's published in the articles as exactly what he said. The man is a complete non-entity. It would be effortless for Trump to defeat, were it the case that this was a legitimate election. Now, there are several factors entering here. Google, as Dr. Epstein explained, can be counted on to produce up to 15 million votes for the Democratic nominee. They were asleep at the switch in 2016, or Hillary would have won for a certainty. Everyone took for granted their own propaganda that she had a 98% chance of winning the election, that Trump voters might as well not turn out. They did, however, rev up in 2018, which is why the Democrats retook the House, and why Trump didn't get at least 2 more Senate seats that I was predicting at the time would be the case based on then current polling, absent, of course, familiarity with this hidden variable that was going to make a difference. They're going to go all out in 2020. Not only that, but now, in the wake of the coronavirus, Hillary Clinton is recommending voting by email, which would guarantee the loss of democracy because emails are so easy to intercept and alter. I mean, it's bad enough that we have electronic voting machines that are so effortless to hack. Let me give you an illustration. In the wake of 2016, Jill Stein, the head of the Green Party, asked for a recount in 3 states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. In Pennsylvania, it turned out they had such a prevalent use of touch screen voting machines that don't even leave a paper record that it was impossible to review what had happened there to determine whether the outcome had been on the up and up. I mean, look, it's ridiculous. You got a Princeton guy who's able to hack any of these machines in 5 minutes or less. The owners claim they won't share their software because it's proprietary. But how could it possibly be proprietary if it's all it's doing is taking a number n and adding 1 more to it to produce a new number n+1, which is all that's involved in counting votes? What's going on is they're using all kinds of programs to shift, for example, the outcome for the candidate who's going to receive the most votes, and if it isn't their preferred candidate, so that they simply reverse the totals, and then the overall number of those voted remains accurate. It's just the distribution is affected. So in Pennsylvania, it wasn't even possible to do a recount. In Wisconsin, where I reside, we have paper ballots but optical scans. That means you do have paper ballots that can be counted. It turned out that Trump actually wound up, when they redid, with about 140 more votes than he originally had been granted during the initial count, and taking Wisconsin. In Michigan, it was a fiasco. They discovered massive stuffing of the ballot box in Detroit, for example. In some cases, they had more ballots stuffed into the ballot box than there were available voters to cast them. It was a complete catastrophe, showing all kinds of proof of the election having been rigged, not for Donald Trump, but for Hillary Clinton. Surprise, surprise, surprise. So, what's going on is the Democratic National Committee, which has been very deeply involved in massive corruption throughout, where they deprived Bernie Sanders of the nomination in 2016, where I think that Bernie would have had a very good chance of beating Donald Trump because they overlapped in their foreign policy, which was Trump's greatest asset, and where Bernie's domestic agenda would have been more appealing to most Americans than the Donalds, by shifting 13 primaries that Bernie had won into Hillary's column to guarantee that she would be the nominee. Then she ran that lackluster campaign. The whole allegation that there was Russian hacking, of course, was completely absurd. Bill Binney, our nation's leading cybersecurity expert, studied the case and discovered that the contents of the DNC server had been downloaded to a memory stick in real time at a rate too fast to be distant Russian hacking. It turns out Seth Rich, who was the IT guy for the DNC and a Bernie Sanders supporter, was so disillusioned with the theft of the election from Bernie that he made this download with the assistance of Kim.com, a familiar internet personality, and then got it to the hands of Julian Assange by way of Craig Murray, who is the UK ambassador to Uzbekistan, where both Murray and Assange have confirmed that they know the leaker, that there was no hacking, they know the leaker, and he was not Russian. And after Seth Rich was shot, apparently at the direction of John Podesta, based upon my research, where I have a book about all this called Exposing the Russia Hoax, rather inexpensive, you can find online at Lulu, for example, because he wanted to set example, and he didn't even care if the evidence of having leaked was not all that airtight. They had three reasons for claiming Russian intervention had affected the election. First, of course, to explain away Hillary's miserable performance, where she's a terrible, dreadful candidate. She's stale. She's yesterday's news. She's completely unappealing to the American people. We've had too much of Hillary Clinton, which is why the only way she would have a chance of becoming president is if she were appointed vice president, and then they finagled the vote to get that ticket into office, and then Joe Biden would step aside mercifully because of his cognitive incompetence, and Hillary would assume the presidency. And in the second place, to conceal the emails that revealed a whole lot of entanglements with Pizzagate, which is actually the American franchise of Pedogate. This is child self-trafficking that goes on around the world, where John Podesta himself appears to be the pedophile in chief, where one of the most revealing memoranda to emerge for those who were actually paying attention is that Barack Obama had paid some $25,000 of American taxpayer money to fly hot dogs and pizza to the White House from Chicago for a private party. Now, if you know anything about White House culinary, you know that's preposterous, because the White House, out of fear of poisoning, won't allow any food from outside sources to be brought into the building. In the second place, if you actually flying hot dogs and pizza like pepperoni or Coney Island from Chicago, it would be, unappetizing. You have to reheat it. I mean, it's a stupid idea in the first place. You have to understand that you were using slang. Hot dogs and pizza are pedo expression for little boys and little girls. So what we really have there is proof that Barack Obama was flying little boys and little girls from Chicago to the White House at taxpayer expense for a private party. I'll let your imagination do the rest. And in the third place, to distract attention from Hillary's own entanglements with Russia, where by way of a Canadian company named Uranium One, Hillary sold off 20% of U.S. uranium reserves to Russia for a $145 million donation to the Clinton Foundation. Now, I would remind you, and this sale, by the way, required the approval of then President Barack Obama, that Julius and Ethel Rosenberg received the electric chair for sharing U.S. atomic secrets with the then Soviet Union. So what do Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama deserve for selling off 20% of U.S. uranium reserves to Russia? Contemplate that, if you may. Meanwhile, it's completely fascinating that initially the public was divided really largely along party lines, with the extent to which the president had been successful in dealing with the coronavirus, where it was a week ago on the order of 42 to 43% support, of 55% opposition. Now, in fact, Trump has taken many measures and the public is rallying around him, and now Trump has a majority support from the American people. The numbers are really quite symmetrically reversed. So we now have support from 54 to 55% of the American people, in opposition from only 42 to 43. Those are the never-Trumpers, who are hard, opponents in the Democratic Party. So the phenomenon we see taking place here is, like the effect of the attack of 9/11, rallying around George W. Bush in complete ignorance of the fact that his Vice President Dick Cheney was actually the executive director conducting the 9/11 operation against America, where the brilliant book Crossing the Rubicon places together all the proof that that is what was taking place by Rupert Murdoch. That's exactly what was taking place from public sources, that Dick Cheney was the mastermind in executing 9/11. I have a huge amount on 9/11 from my research, including, of course, having been the founder of Scholars for 9/11 Truth, which you can watch on BitChute, BITCHUTE, one of the few secure video archives we have available yet in this country, by going to 9/11, who was responsible and why, on BitChute. Brian Rue, R-U-A-G, was my host on that occasion, but you can educate yourself as to what happened there, and all the evidence we have to prove that this was a complete political theater deception of the American people, that although a lot of people died, it was all a manufactured event to hoodwink the American people into supporting the war agenda of the Bush-Cheney administration, where getting into office was precisely the reason they had to steal the election in Florida from Al Gore, where Jeb Bush, then as governor, played an instrumental role, and where Anton Scalia made an absurd decision in favor of not allowing the Florida vote to be recounted, which we now know would have resulted in an Al Gore victory. Bush and Gore had to be in office to bring us 9/11 to benefit the Israelis, where the Israeli lobby, AIPAC, exercises vast control over the American government. Now, that's a wonderful development. There has, however, been a COVID rescue plan, which, as Zero Hedge has reported, ought to be vehemently opposed for the following reason. It has to do with shorting companies, requiring them to pay their employees medical and wages during the period that they're being forced to close by the coronavirus epidemic. And it turns out that while there are 5.7 billion companies in the United States, 90% of them have less than 20 employees. So that 90% of American companies are going to be put out of business if they have to provide this kind of financial support to their employees. I was absolutely stunned when, during his opening remarks of the debate with Bernie Sanders that occurred on Sunday, that Joe Biden declared that the government should pay for all the medical treatment, all of the mortgage coverage, and all of the lost wages for the American people, which would be a staggering burden on the American taxpayer. I think that Biden was thereby out-socializing the socialists so that Bernie could work up a good head of steam in explaining how important it is to have Medicare for all, which studies have shown would save the American people $450 billion every year in comparison to the co-pays, the premiums, and all the other pharmaceutical expenses associated with our present medical system, and 68,000 lives every year. 450 billion, 68,000 lives every single year if we had Medicare for all. Well, Biden, of course, doesn't want the American people to catch on to why it's such a great idea. Medicare for all was actually originally introduced to be expanded to the entire American population in segments. I myself, as an older American, have been a beneficiary of Medicare for all, as well as for Social Security, where in fact, America has a lot of programs that technically qualify as socialist programs that have been the most beneficial to the American people in our history, including Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, and workmen's compensation. We'll see how this plays out. Meanwhile, it's fascinating to discover that Israel is having a secret coronavirus debate where public health service chiefs tell the Knesset, that's their parliament, intelligence panel, that Israel needs to employ a total lockdown and personal monitoring in the struggle to contain the spread of the virus. It also turns out Shin Bet, which is the spy agency, the green light to use counterterrorism operations against those infected with the new coronavirus, which is a very serious and troubling development. But where my own suspicion is that there's good reason to believe that Bibi Netanyahu may have played an important role in constructing this coronavirus attack on the United States. Bibi has recently boasted that he destroyed free speech in America by getting Trump to expand the definition of anti-Semitism to include criticism of actions of the government of Israel, and particularly to not allow support for the ban on Israeli products, which has been so beneficial. But not only is Bibi taking public credit for the slashing our First Amendment, he has said, and this is a very stunning quote that every American needs to understand, if we get caught, he's talking about himself as an extremist, if we get caught, they will just replace us with persons of the same cloth, so it does not matter what you do. America is a golden calf, and we will suck it dry, chop it up, and sell it off piece by piece until there's nothing left but the world's biggest welfare state that we will create and control. Why? Because it is the will of God, and America is big enough to take the hit, so we can do it again and again and again. This is what we do to countries that we hate. We destroy them very slowly and make them suffer for refusing to be our slaves. Bear in mind, that is a statement of Bibi Netanyahu, whom America has been told is the leader of Israel, which is supposed to be our gallant ally in the Middle East, but where in fact the agenda is to suck us dry and then tear us apart piece by piece. And if you go back and look at other statements by Israeli prime ministers, you find that Bibi is hardly alone. For example, Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon on October 3rd, 2001, shortly after 9/11, said, Every time we do something, you tell me Americans will do this and will do that. I want to tell you something very clear. Don't worry about American pressure on Israel. We, the Jewish people, control America, and the Americans know it. He was saying this in the wake of 9/11 for those who are concerned that Americans might wake up to the reality that it was brought to us compliments of the CIA, the neocons in the Department of Defense, and the Mossad. And one of the major reasons we're getting this unrelenting propaganda about the massive threat of the coronavirus is precisely because the mainstream media is dominated by Zionists. I have a panel of 1,000 officials with CNN, 100 officials of CNN, every one of whom is a dual U.S. Israeli citizen. I have another panel from NBC, 100 executives, every one of which is a dual U.S. Israeli citizen. I have another panel of 100 executives from the New York Times, every one of whom is a dual U.S. Israeli citizen. So I want you to know there's a real threat out there, that the coronavirus is a political pandemic, not a medical emergency, but it's being exploited to tear down this nation. We are fortunate to have Donald Trump at the helm because I believe he will navigate his way around and bring us out of this, hopefully relatively intact. But I tell you, every single day America is shut down is costing on the order of $1 trillion to the wealth of the nation and the economy. It cannot long endure without bringing about damage to the United States from which we may never recover. I wish I could be more positive and optimistic, but I am absolutely committed to the proposition that the American people are entitled to the truth about their own history. And without knowing the truth, we cannot make decisions that are in our own best interest on the basis of accurate information. I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you here once again. That is the latest from the front. That's how it is here in the USA today.
Thank you very much, Jim. Wow, that was a lot to unpack, and you didn't even mention the Federal Reserve. What do you think about did you mention that, the stimulus package, that the quantitative easing of the Federal Reserve? And
well, the problem is too much of the Federal Reserve's actions are to benefit big financial institutions. We don't need that. What we need is for the American people to benefit, so that it's going to be much more beneficial to follow the Yang proposal, for example, giving money directly to the American people. Because the American people take that money and they go out and buy products. That increases demand and gets the mighty economic engine of the United States working again to provide the supply. So that the proposals that I've heard floated about giving American couples, say, $2,400 apiece, or other forms, $1,000 for each child and so forth, that could actually have benefits of getting us back into the game, provided that we're able to contain the coronavirus, where I'm hopeful that all the research taking place now is going to bring about its containment in the very near future.
Well, thank you for all that, Jim. Until next time, thank you for all the updates.
My great pleasure. Talk then.
Thank you. You too. Well,
I hope that gave you what you were looking for.
oh yeah. Lots of updates, lots of good stuff. Until next time, we're gonna have to finish up and study the Federal Reserve closely here. So everybody stay vigilant, stay alert. Thank you very much. Geezy's out.